Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Keri Smith, and I'm joined by my occasional co-host, Carter Laren. Hello, Carter.
Hey, Keri. Not so much for Deprogrammed anymore. It's fun to be on Deprogrammed. So
yeah, it's like a special treat when you're here.
Yeah.
I like your outfit today. Okay, today.
This is the standard, this is the obligatory, I don't care so much, but I'm a VC. I'm trying to be like, look, I have the jacket, but I wear a t-shirt, so I'm cool like you. This was my uniform for years.
That's like the relaxed professional. When I worked in entertainment, that's what they had the host of our show wear. T-shirts and jackets. Yeah. Those kind of professional jackets. Okay. Today, I'm very excited that you're joining me today, actually, because today we're going to get to talk to Jodi Shaw, who several people in the Unsafe Space community have been suggesting that we reach out to. Jodi Shaw is famous for recently speaking out publicly about the racially hostile work environment of her former employer, Smith College. She continues to speak out about her experience with trainings and policies in the workplace that create a hostile environment. A lifelong liberal and musical artist, Jodi is possessed by an unwavering belief in the individual humanity and uniqueness of each human being. She believes in forced adherence to critical social justice undermines moral agency and our ability to connect meaningfully with each other as individuals, and that a supportive community of connected individuals is critical to social progress. Jodi is currently a team member at Counterweight. Many of you guys are familiar with Counterweight, which is a non-partisan grassroots organization advocating for liberal concepts of social justice, including individualism, universalism, viewpoint diversity, and the free exchange of ideas. Imagine that. Welcome, Jodi.
I think that's all wrong. Think that sounds all horrible.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
We don't want that.
Welcome, Jodi. By the way, Jodi, at the outset, I have to say this. For the past several years, we've been looking at social justice stuff, and there's various crazy things they do. Your story has, I think, literally every crazy thing all in one story. It's like they segregate based on race. They complain about cultural appropriation. There's the white fragility Kafka trap. There's like the low expectations, like individualism is white supremacy, time management, black and gay people can't do. White people can't be discriminated against. They ignore requests for clarification on their rules. They slow roll your complaints. Like literally everything is all in your story.
Oh my gosh. I've never heard it put that way before, but you are so right. Yeah, this happened over a period of a few years, like all these. So I was there long enough so that everything happened.
They did it all on that
play. If we were playing SJW bingo, that's a winning card.
She wins.
Your experience is the winning.
I love it. That's we were just talking about the ability to laugh.
Yes, I love that you have the ability to laugh about this, and I guess we should just start with people who are not familiar with your full bingo card experience at Smith College. Can you give us a little background? How would you start off describing, how long were you at Smith? What was your position? And how did you start to come into contact with this ideology in the workplace?
Well, since it is a full bingo card, I will do my best to a small digest form. I started working at Smith in 2017. It was the fall. And I just moved here from New York City up to Western Massachusetts, a small town. And I started as a temporary librarian. And I was hired as an outreach and engagement librarian. And I was hired specifically, I remember talking in the interview about, the ability to do wild and crazy things to engage students with what might otherwise be kind of boring material. And so I was a temporary librarian, and after the spring after I was hired, I was tasked to doing a library orientation, again, to transmit very boring information to students in a highly engaging, wild and crazy way. And I started working on that project, and I decided to put it into a rap form. And I think you know what's coming. Everybody was fine with this, by the way. And I am a musician, I have experience. And, I worked on this, aside from all the other pieces that one must do to create a presentation for 600 people. I mean, I was the point person, so there was a lot of details other than just the material and performing the material. So everybody was fine with this. And then something happened on campus. I refer to it as the incident of July 31st, 2018, for lack of a better term, when a black student a white custodian called campus police because there was somebody who in a building who was not supposed to be there, and it was a black student, and she made a Facebook post about it, referred to it as sleeping while black or eating while black, and it blew up. Her Facebook post blew up, and Smith College immediately sprung into action, offering profuse apologies and announcing its intention to initiate committees, discussions, policies, anti-bias trainings, and all of those kinds of things. So that stuff kind of ramped up at that point, even though it had not even begun to investigate what had actually happened. And so it was kind of like assumed that this was yet another example of systemic racism, which is what the student was claiming, or she claimed it was another in a pattern of racist incidents she had experienced at Smith. This incident kind of snowballed into more when the student then falsely accused two other people who weren't even involved, and their lives were upended. But in the meantime, I give you this for context because that really sets the stage for a walking on eggshells environment in which a custodian really, if you look into this case more closely, there was a New York Times article about it, actually. So I highly recommend anyone who's curious about it to go check out this New York Times article in February by Michael Powell. It really created a walking on eggshells environment because the staff, an investigation was undertaken, I guess, and it was very exhaustive, very detailed, and they found no incident of racial bias. And yet the college persisted. They quietly announced these findings and said, the president said, but we cannot rule out unconscious bias. So still it was like, and then proceeded with all these initiatives aimed to combat racism on campus. So it was almost, they were supporting this narrative that it had been an incident of racism. And the student had also falsely accused two other individuals on her and put their faces and contact information on her Facebook page.
Wow.
And, one of those people was put on paid leave and never returned because he had an underlying condition that was exacerbated by this. He could not return to work. And then the other one ended up in the hospital at one point. And she was continued to get harassed for the rest of the year. So staff like me see this happening, and we see all this unfurl, and it makes you like realize that it doesn't matter even what you did or where you were at the time. If a student accuses you of a racist incident or racially motivated behavior, you will be punished in some way. Maybe the administration isn't going to like come and punish you, but your life can be ruined or at least upended in a very serious way that causes actual material harm. The college did not apologize for this, for promoting this narrative that was then hurting these people because the public thought these two other people were involved because the student had named them. So anyway, that's a long story to say this incident happened and everything ramped up. And I was told less than a week before this presentation, you can't do the rap because you're white, specifically because you're white.
Wow.
It would be deemed cultural appropriation. And they referenced this incident. I ended up leaving, and I was up for a job in the library at the time. So it was very fraught for me not to be able to do this. Because remember, I was temporary librarian. So I left that department. I took a lesser paying job in the Department of Residence Life, very nuts and bolts kind of job, like thinking I'll be under the radar here. I can there was a pay cut, but I thought, no, it's okay. I'll just do my job and go home. I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to, this race stuff. And I had been involved. I had believed it, like I had believed that the incident about the student had been racially motivated because I didn't have any information when it happened. And I was very confused when I was told I couldn't do the rap. I was like, this feels like racial discrimination, but can white people be discriminated against? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I was like really in a lot of turmoil. So my solution was to leave, go to a different department. And I found out that in that department, social justice is a core tenet of the department. And so things actually, I was expected to participate in discussions. I was expected to help create and support a curriculum for students that was based on these concepts, very much grounded in CRT and the oppressor oppressed stuff. And that felt really bad. I started talking to supervisors gently, like suggesting other things, like the concept of anti-fragility from Jonathan Haidt. Like I showed my supervisor a video, and then something happened where I was at a professional development retreat, and I knew we were going to be expected to talk about race. It was like a whole day devoted to discussing our identities, which at Smith really focuses largely on race. And so I was like, at this point, I was like, okay, this doesn't feel right to me. You can't ask somebody about their race in a job interview. Like, why is it a continued condition of my employment to talk about my race? So I went to my supervisor ahead of time. I said, I'm not comfortable discussing my race in the workplace. And she said, no problem. Just say that at the workshop. So I went to the workshop, and everyone went around the table, and I think we all know here there's a script, right? These aren't authentic. These aren't actually authentic conversations about race anyway. These are scripts. And
it's not a conversation. It's not a conversation at all. But yeah,
it's not. There are words that you are expected to say, and they are based on your skin color.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we all know what those are.
You've used the metaphor of struggle sessions. That's basically what they are. And everyone in the
it's a struggle
session knows
session.
what they're supposed to say. Right.
Yeah, it is very much a struggle session. But I had essentially been given permission, like just say you're uncomfortable. So that's what I did. I was the last person to get to. And the question was weird too. It was like, please talk about your race/culture in the context of your childhood or growing up, in your growing up years and your college years. And so even that is like, feels like, I don't want to talk about my childhood at work, like that feels the whole thing. And then equating race with culture, the whole thing was just like really reductive. So I just said, I'm uncomfortable talking about that at work. So, it was a little bit of silence, and then it went on. And then a little later, one of the facilitators, hired professional facilitator, said, any white person who exhibits discomfort, So apparently, I even if I seemed uncomfortable, even if I was saying the right words, but seemed uncomfortable, any white person who exhibits discomfort when asked to discuss their race, you might think they're uncomfortable, but they're not. They're actually, it's called white fragility, and it's a power play. So
wow.
that did not feel good.
No.
I was shocked. And that was the line for me. That was the line when I realized now it's not just about feeling uncomfortable about like not saying something. Now we're using shame, because it was a public shaming, let's be clear, of me as a white person, because I was the only one not to speak, to try to compel you to say certain words, to say certain things, or even have certain feelings, like I'm like to be not uncomfortable or something. And that's when I knew I had to file a complaint, in spite of the fact that a white person is not supposed to file a complaint of racial hostility, harassment. That's what I did. I went and I filed a complaint, and the story goes on and on. I mean, I went to file a complaint. I was asked if I believe in white privilege. I was told I was going to be handled differently because I'm white. It just goes on and on. And then George Floyd was killed right when I filed the complaint. And so then everything went to hyperdrive. There was more like segregated stuff happening. There was a
Can I jump in for a second and ask you?
Yes, please.
So when you described that incident on campus of July 31st, 2018, that I was thinking that makes me think that's a good analogy to the George Floyd incident on a national scale, because it sounds like, if I'm hearing it correctly, that was that was the event that really kicked this ideology into overdrive at Smith.
I think so.
Maybe.
I think the ideology was already there.
Yeah.
But it really kicked it into overdrive. You're right, hyperdrive. And then, of course, George Floyd did the same thing, both
nationally
and nationally.
Yes.
And somebody has told me that this is the pattern. And it's a pattern like in a microcosm, like on campus or in a national level, that there's an incident.
Yes.
And then whether or not the facts of that incident are actually in alignment with the need for this hyperdrive activity, the hyperdrive activity takes place anyway. It's almost like it's used as a justification, even though we didn't really actually examine the incident to find out.
That is exactly, that's why I wanted to point that out, because for anyone who's watching, if you've seen this unfold, and maybe it's unfolding now in a organization you're in, at your place of employment, in a hobby group, it always starts. It could be any incident. I don't know exactly how one catches fire and the other doesn't, but there's, like you said, the reported so-called facts of the incident don't even have to be true. In the knitting world, it started with a very innocuous blog post by a woman named Karen Templer, who blogged about a trip to India, and that's what set the fire off. It could have been anything. And so your story happens right after an incident at Smith that was, in this microcosm, and then this bigger event happened where I think it sort of accelerated the ideology nationally. When you filed your complaint, can you tell us a little bit? I know you've already talked a lot about the leading to that, but can you tell us a little bit about the school's response?
Well, when I went in to talk to it's a person she's like a compliance officer to ensure that the school is compliant with EEOC. That's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It's like a national and state level, to ensure that that places are not running afoul of the civil rights law. That's her job, to make sure that the school is in compliance. And so she handles these kinds of complaints. So I went in to talk to her about it, and I told her what happened in the library. There was an email memorializing what happened in the library. There was the dean made some other statements. The dean of the libraries made some other statements to me. I told her what had happened in the meeting in residence life. And she just looked at me, and then she said, "Do you believe in white privilege?" And then a little later on, she said,
"That's like asking, do you believe?" It's like a religious statement, Jodi. Like, do you believe in Jesus? Like, do you accept Jesus as your Lord and personal Savior? She's asking you to make a commitment of. I'm sorry,
do you believe in science? Do you believe in biology? I mean, we are at that point, whether biology is where biology is the religion and the social justice stuff is like objective truth or something. That's kind of like everything's been flipped.
Right.
So anyway, a little later on, she said, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was created to protect traditionally marginalized groups of people. She made that statement on two separate occasions. And then, or maybe, I can't remember, maybe she just made it once. And then at the end of the meeting, she said, if you proceed with a complaint, I'm going to have to hire an outside investigator. And I said, why is that? I thought that was what you do. I thought you investigated these complaints. And she said, yes, normally I do, but you're white. So this is different. And she's like, I don't have expertise in this area. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't it just the same exact procedure?
Investigating something a white person said is completely different than investigating something a black person has said. You just don't get it. Can I ask you about, I just want to rewind a little bit. You talked about this incident, which turned out to be false, kind of being the act that precipitated a lot of unrest and hyperbolic social justice activism on campus. It seems to me that the groundwork has to already be there, because you've got a student body you need to have a community that's already in the mode where they're actively seeking a reason to be upset. And that's not something that happens overnight. Is that your experience, or what was the climate prior to that? Like, were they primed for this? Were they actively looking for a reason to justify their narrative?
Well, I mean, we could ask that question of the student on an individual level. You know, the student believed immediately that it was racial. It was because of her skin color. I think because I think she was probably primed. That's just conjecture. Because of all of the other incidents that had happened nationally. We have the Yale incident with Sarah Brash. I don't know if you're familiar with that. The napping while black. It's been dubbed.
Yes.
But as a community, I mean, yes, I think this this notion that of lived experience, you know, over objective, like the notion of, as I was told in residence life, we were taught about, or I was schooled in microaggressions, which is all about impact and not intent. Intent does not matter. And so I do believe that these things were floating around, these notions, and were probably on campus and were also on a national level too. I think they were there, but they just weren't in the hyperdrive mode that they are now after George Floyd. I mean, I can only speculate because I wasn't paying that much attention. And at that point I was kind of going along with it. I arrived at Smith and I'm not a very political person. I'm kind of rather ill-informed actually of like political issues. You know, I've been a musician for many, many years and kind of just was not that political and wasn't really paying that much attention to the race stuff until I got to Smith. And I was told, even before this incident, I was told, well, systemic racism and white people have privilege. And apparently the way you can help racism if you're white is to talk about your white privilege and so on and so forth. And I just believed it. I thought, well, you know, okay, these are academics. These are PhDs. This is Smith College. They must know what they're talking about. So I'm going to do this. Like, I want to help. I don't want, racism is bad and I want to do my part. And I so that's why it was very confusing when I was told I couldn't do the rap. I was like, wait a minute. Like, yeah. So in a way, and somebody pointed this out, sometimes even though I was still had that little, still small voice inside me saying something about this ideology doesn't feel right to me, I felt guilty for feeling that way. And I felt like that meant, and I would never admit it at the time because I thought it meant, oh, that's my white privilege, or that's me being like, actually I'm racist and I have to wipe that out. It wasn't until later that I realized that's my moral compass. That's like, yes, my moral compass being screaming at me like, this is wrong. There's something very, very wrong about this. And I think that's a really dangerous aspect of this whole ideology, is that it kind of disables that moral, it like tricks you into thinking that the part of you that's telling you that what's right and wrong, it tricks you into like crushing that or disabling it. And then that's how it replicates, right? So anyway, I was doing my best to disable that part of me because I thought it was bad. And this incident happened and I decided not to report it because I thought, well, and also it was just practical too. Like, even if I was racially discriminated against in not being able to do this professional opportunity, I'll never get a job. I knew, I was like, a white person reporting racial discrimination, nobody will ever hire me if they find out I did that. Like, so I was like, I don't know, there's all these conflicting things going on. So yeah, I mean, it was there and I was aware of it, but I think unfortunately, there's a few people I know who have been speaking out about this since the beginning and weren't personally impacted like by it. I think until someone is personally affected by it in a deep way, I think sometimes that's what it takes for someone to realize, oh, this is really messed up. It sounds like
you got stuck in a Kafka trap and you were like, oh, the white fragility Kafka trap. And once you saw it for what it was, it seems like, because you said that was the thing that kind of was your...
Well, that was the thing that sprung me into actually taking action. But I had started processing when I got into res life and I was told I had to do this and this and this. I started processing and being like, and I started transgressing my information bubble. I watched a Jordan Peterson video. I think that was the first step into, oh my God, the misogynist, the like white supremacist Jordan Peterson the Nazi.
We have an overlap here because that was part of what, I don't know if you know my background, but I was in the ideology. I was a true believer for about 2 decades.
I knew that. And
then Jordan Peterson is one of the things that kind of started to help me make sense of that. What you called those your nagging moral compass, or those nagging questions that you're supposed to disable.
Yeah.
It really kind of brought those questions that I had been stuffing down for a while to the surface. But yeah. But so what did you watch of his?
I can't remember, but a bunch of stuff. I mean, once I watched one, I just kept watching. I was like, I couldn't get enough. I was like, but mostly it was the stuff about telling the truth, and how going along with the lie is the same as lying, and about how lying to yourself, it's like, it's really it causes psychic damage. And I could feel that damage, I could feel it in myself. And I thought, wow, I think he's right. I think this is damaging me. And also damaging was spreading that lie to students, or being expected to do that. That also felt really horrible. And so I tried to talk to people. I remember talking to 2 of my supervisors, and both within a minute, I was asking them, can we talk about, like, what does social justice mean? Like, what is it? And within a minute, both of them said, I don't really think about this that much. And that was like kind of the end of the conversation. I was like, wow, like, I think I'm thinking about social justice way more than the people I'm working with, or at least like really thinking about it. Like, what does it actually mean? So yeah, it was a process, but I think I was trying very hard I was just trying to keep my head down. And I'd started talking to colleagues too. That was the other thing I started doing. I started testing people out, and 90% of the people I talked to were like, yeah, this is really messed up.
Wow, that high.
Yeah, a lot, like one-on-one. It had to be one-on-one. Like in a group, nobody would say anything. But I didn't talk to 90% of the people on campus, granted. I talked to, maybe up to 10 people, I would say.
Can I tell you, I just did an interview, it's not out yet, but with a friend of mine who has just sold his company and is leaving the entertainment world. And he's someone who felt he censored himself. He was quiet for many years about woke ideology, but he said the same thing that you just said. He said, in a group, people won't admit that they have misgivings or questions about this ideology. But if you talk to people one-on-one, they all will agree with you. Eventually, they'll all share an anecdote about racism or sexism and how it's affected them in the workplace. And it's just that it's an interesting phenomenon. People are too afraid in front of others. They feel this need to comply, but one-on-one, you can get people to open up.
Yeah, it's the mob thing. There's something, I think about that a lot. Like, I'm really interested in the internal processes of how this happens, because it's familiar, right? We've seen this happen many times in history. And so it's like, there's something primal about it too. Like the fear of being cast out of the herd. Cause we have the heads on the sticks, right? I'm a head on the stick. Like we see what happens when someone does speak out in a group. The potential for, people's lives are being ruined. And sometimes not even for speaking out, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's what's so terrible. It's like people who, like dining staff workers who are just telling a student to put their shoes on because it's a state law, like being accused of racism. And then, it's just, we see what happens to other people, and that even makes us more afraid. It's like warning that could happen to you. And then you get eaten by a lion. You're out in the wilderness, like you're on your own. I think it taps into something really primal. There's something about
we are social creatures. We absolutely need a community to survive. You do get eaten by a lion actually on your own, right? So it's kind of a funny statement, but that would be an ingrained natural response, right? It's just like, Keri, you talk about the Ash conformity studies all the time, right? Where like a whole bunch of people pick the wrong obvious answer to an obvious question, and very few people, when they see that other people have chosen the wrong one, very few people will do what they know is correct and choose the right one. Most people go along. And there's not really even any consequences in that experiment other than, I guess, feeling different. But that feeling enough is
it's so deep, right? That fear. I'm very interested in that too, Jodi. I wonder if you, part of my process in understanding this belief system and understanding this mob mentality and the psychology is lately I've just been on a kick of watching cult documentaries. Are you in that phase of trying to understand it yet?
Yeah, I watched a cult. Yeah, I watched one a while ago, but somebody just recommended the Nexium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've been thinking about cults a lot, and one of this just came up with somebody because the one thing that people say is, "Oh, but there's no leader."
Yeah,
and somebody I spoke to had a good response for that, which was that we live in a decentralized. Our information is now decentralized, so it's like it is a cult with a decentralized. But it's decentralized, so there's no one.
It's like
leader.
A cult on the blockchain. It's the decentralized cult.
Yes.
Anyone can have a minor and contribute to the cult. Hey, I found some racism over here. I'm putting it on the blockchain.
That's exactly what it is. It's all these little miners working away and whatever their field of study or specialty is, like some are in the knitting world, like I'm looking for racism over here, I'm mining. And others are mining at Smith.
And there's like a network, right? Yeah. It's totally, that's what's going on. It is a cult. I mean, it has all the characteristics, like, you know, Scientology, like, or in some sects of Hasidic Jews, if you leave, you're out.
Oh yeah.
You're out, and everyone sees like you're banished and you are going to get eaten by a lion. And that's definitely. So,
were you in like you describe yourself as you believe in liberal values like viewpoint diversity, individualism. So do I. I describe myself now, if people want to know, they want to put me in a box, I view myself as a classical liberal, but I used to be squarely in the social justice world, and I preached a lot of this stuff that I now find repulsive, like the idea that you can't be racist towards certain races or that you can't be sexist towards certain sexes, or the idea that we must treat people differently on the basis of race and sex in order to end racism and sexism. I used to push that. And so I was in that world. Did you, were you in the social justice world? Did you accept some of these tenets, or was it more of, because you kind of described it as being, well, I want to end racism, so I guess I'll talk about white privilege. Was it you kind of casually accepting some of this stuff?
Yeah, casually, and also like feeling guilt for having that voice inside me. So in some cases, even going a little bit above and beyond, like going voluntarily attending. I remember somebody in the library had a meeting for white staff only to talk about racism or whiteness. I can't remember. And I went, and words came out of my mouth that like I was trying to. It was a whites only, but it wasn't a Klan rally. It was something else. I'm kidding. Yeah, it's interesting. The affinity groups on campus, you have Black, Asian, like that's like half the population, Asian, LGBTQ, you know, and then you have white accountability group. because they can't have just a white group. Like you can't have it like the other races, because that would be, can't have a bunch of white people get together just based on their skin color. God forbid. Which brings the whole thing makes the whole thing ridiculous, right? Like, why are we having these groups?
Obviously. Yeah. I mean, there's so many parallels, as Keri just pointed out, between actual white supremacists and critical race theorists who are pushing this ideology in their belief about other people, right? Their belief about different racial groups is I think it was, I hate to quote the guy, but I think it was George Bush who called it the soft bigotry of low expectations. Yes. But that's what it is. It's like, oh, well, you know, we don't expect you to do these things. And I think you talked a couple times about, I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of your story, but the president in some letter made some comment about, well, to the students of color, I say blah, blah, blah. And it's really this signal that, hey, students of color, you're very fragile. And this thing that's really innocuous probably will upset you. And I need to call you out specifically because you're snowflakes. It's really condescending. It's as condescending as the racism from the late 19th or the mid 19th century.
I agree. And that was what I found particularly troubling about being asked to create and push this curriculum, for this co-curriculum for students, because that was the message. And it's incredibly disempowering rhetoric, both for white students and non-white students. It's it's essentialism. It's like your skin color is kind of like, like if you're white and you achieve something in your life, it's kind of because you got a pass. It's not because you actually did anything. And if you're not white, maybe you'll achieve something, but it's going to be really hard because white people, and also this setting up this toxic dependency, like as if people of color, even that term, we could talk about that term, but people of color are dependent somehow on the whim of white people. Like if only white people do X, then people of color will somehow be free? I mean, that sounds eerily familiar.
It's massively dependent. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's very toxic and unhealthy. It's unhealthy.
Do you think, I don't want to get too far afield, but do you think that the people, I'll say the elites who are pushing this, not the people who, like, you said some of your supervisors just hadn't thought about it at all. But some people clearly think about this a lot because they write books about it and they're out, pushing this ideology. It's really hard for me to believe that they're not just actually racist, like seriously in their hearts racist, and are just projecting.
That is a really frightening thought. I mean, to even the notion of white privilege, like you actually have to believe that white people have some kind of, just believing that is that, yeah, it is literally racism. It's racism. Yeah. And I mean, it's ironic, right? We talk about the president, we can't rule out unconscious bias. And it's like, I think they have this idea of what racism looks like, right? It's Klan rallies and it's this, and well, I don't do that, so I'm not racist. I don't think they think they're racist. Do you? Or do you
think some of them know. I think some of the elites know that they are bad people and they don't care. They're just out for power. But I think most people don't know. I think most people, like you're saying, I think your description of yourself was, like, early on was pretty interesting for me to hear, because it was I think probably pretty typical for, you don't think about these issues a lot. You want to be a good person, and they say some things. It feels bad to do what they say, but there's not enough, I would say, probably there's not enough intellectual confidence in your position because you haven't thought about it a lot. So, and they've got this patina of legitimacy because it's being pushed by academics in positions of prestige. And so you kind of defer to them in a similar way that you might defer to a cardiologist who tells you have to do something. It's like, well, I'm not a cardiologist. I haven't really thought about the vascular system or my heart very much. If he tells me I have to eat more fiber or whatever it is, like I'm going to, lower cholesterol, then I guess I'll do that. And normally that's a fine way to function in the world. But in this particular instance, the cardiologist is like an evil guy trying to, shove cheeseburgers down your throat.
Yeah. And it's an abuse of power then, isn't it? Because you know that the patient goes in trusting that it's a fiduciary contract, really, that that you're best, and it's that's an abuse, a massive abuse of power when students and their families, they entrust their intellectual life, and they're at a time in their life when they're really growing and developing their identity, a really critical stage, I would think, in their life, for many of them, the first time away from home. And then they trust this institution, and this institution is telling them these really morally reprehensible things.
Yeah.
I think.
Something I think is really...
jump in and just...
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say to your earlier point, Carter, you were both answering the question about whether they knowingly hold prejudice, like racist and sexist beliefs themselves. I think a lot of the ones who are architects of the ideology do. Because, and some of them have admitted as much, Robin DiAngelo has admitted as much in her book that she has racist views and prejudice towards Black people. And I think a lot of times for those people who are architects of it, it's probably very psychologically comforting to then extrapolate these personal character flaws on an entire group of people and say, they fall into this ideology and they start pushing it and they start writing books about it because it alleviates that burden of personal responsibility for their own racism. It's like, well, I have this racism, but so do all white people. And we're born with it, and I can't help it. It's my whiteness coming out. In fact, I've heard this is now something that white people who are woke say when they do something that's considered bad. They'll say, "Oh, my bad. That was my whiteness coming out." Which
really does forgive. It's really a way to avoid any self-improvement, Keri, right?
Yes, yes, because you're saying this is innate because of my race, this character flaw. But I think a lot of the people who fall into it or who casually accept some of the tenets, I think they have good intent. I don't think that they are coming in with this prejudice that they feel guilty about or whatever. I think they have good intentions. They want to end racism and sexism. They're young, they're full of idealism, and this ideology is being sold, at least to me, it was sold in college. Now it's being sold to kids younger than that, but it's being sold as this way to be a good person and to right the wrongs of the world. And I think people for people with big hearts, who can be easily manipulated, it's very attractive.
Yeah. And it kind of ties back to the original point about trusting, right? Part of it's that I am a liberal. Yeah. Or at least, I'm not, that's a label, but traditionally, like on policy issues, which again, I'm not very political, but I'm definitely would put myself in the liberal camp. And these are liberals. I would argue it's extremely illiberal behavior, but these are supposed liberals. This is a bastion of liberalism, Smith College, liberal arts, elite, the town of Northampton, this area of the country. So it's like, that's confusing. That was confusing for me. And I think for a lot of people too, who consider themselves liberals, where it's like, well, I guess this is what the liberals are telling me is the right thing. So it's not just the institution. It's just, that's your tribe. Right. So you get into a bigger political sphere too. And then it's like, well, am I a liberal? Like, is this what liberalism is? And I don't think that's what liberalism is. I think it's an imposter.
Yeah, I agree.
Whole thing.
I think most labels like that, they're used so broadly and by so many different people to mean so many different things. Like, people can say I'm a liberal and mean that they're a radical leftist. They can also say I'm a liberal and mean they're libertarian. Like, it basically means I'm not a conservative, which isn't very helpful.
Well, even conservatism is based on like classically, like freedom of speech.
It has some elements of classical liberalism, but I would not say conservatism is classically liberal. Although when they're conserving a classically liberal culture, they kind of by default look the same. But conservatism is just about status quo, basically, I think, fundamentally, right? So,
okay.
If they're conserving what used to be a classically liberal culture, it's not for ideological reasons. It's kind of for like tradition reasons, which is a little bit different. But can something that you mentioned about this vulnerable time and like people, it's critical for kids going to college and this is the time they're being exposed to this. Something struck me and I just want to share it. I was reading the other day about this. For sciences and like engineering professors or physics professors or whatever, they prefer to teach students who have had other professors teach them. Like, the more prep work has been done, the easier their job is, and they like it. Philosophy professors hate when students have taken other philosophy classes before they get to teach them. And that should tell you a hell of a lot about the validity and epistemological methods they are using, right? It's basically like, hey, if he gets inoculated to my bullcrap, I don't enjoy it as much. Like, I need to have a blank slate in order for this to work. And if I don't have a blank slate, it's really difficult. And that to me was just really telling. And I think in college now, you do have mostly blank slates with respect to these kind of questions about liberalism, justice, individualism. Like, any kind of philosophical or political deep questions really aren't covered much in, at least hadn't been in the past, in high schools or anything. So you have a blank slate with these college kids.
Yeah. Yep. It's a massive responsibility that that institutions like Smith are, I don't know what the word is, reneging, are not taking seriously. They're abusing.
Abusing is a great word.
Yeah, it's abuse. I consider it abuse. That's an opinion.
So we should get back to your story. So I think we left you in maybe I won't say her name. In the office
of the EEOC.
The director of
She's
EOC.
going to have to bring out an outside investigator because you're white.
Yeah, and I don't know what her specific title was at the time, but she's ensconced in the Office of Equity and Inclusion, or Inclusion and Equity. Can't remember. They changed the name a few times, I think, while I was there. But yeah, so she did hire an outside. I wrote this complaint, which, I mean, I put July 31st, 2018 in there. I talked about all the ways the college had not handled it properly and how that had created a hostile work environment. It was an 80-page complaint or thereabouts. Wow. And it took me a long time to write, and I filed it officially I filed the first part in February because I was worried about retaliation after what had transpired in the meeting. Now I've been framed as my behavior had been framed as an act of aggression. So I was afraid. I was like, oh no, now. So I filed the first part in February, and then I completed the complaint finally in May. It was a lot of work. I had to work on it outside work hours, hundreds of hours of my life I won't get back. And then I think it was like within 2 weeks, George Floyd died. And then things got worse at the college in terms of the racially hostile environment. I mean, a lot worse. And remember, for context, we were in the middle of a global pandemic that had just started. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. The whole world was shutting down. Smith College closed, and we had to send the students home. It was crazy, crazy, crazy time. And the staff were notified that there probably were going to be furloughs. And so everybody's like, oh my God, like, am I going to get furloughed? Am I going to get laid off? And in the middle of these announcements telling people, yeah, we're going to have to, there's not going to be any students on campus or hardly any. So we're going to have to furlough some people. They said in formulating our financial decisions, we are going to take into one of our priorities is racial justice. So it was like insult to injury, right? Like, now, like, you're going to prioritize financially this some document called Toward Racial Justice at Smith, and all of the initiatives proposed in that document, when people are being furloughed, when staff who have been hurt and are working in a hostile work environment are being furloughed. It's just, the irony is like, it's just unreal to me. So that was what happened that summer. And then I got an email from one of my supervisors saying, an email sent just to the white people in the department saying, let's have a meeting to talk about how we can support our Black and brown colleagues or something like that. We want some email from somebody saying white people are especially responsible or have more responsibility for doing this work. And there was like a white shutdown day or something. There was just all this. I mean, suddenly it was just like flooding. It was like every week there was something in my inbox. And so then I started writing emails. And then I started asking questions like, what does this mean? I've just seen this new word, anti-racism. I hadn't actually heard that before. And anti-Black racism. So I started asking questions, and I wrote to HR. I said, look, you released this document saying you're going to look at pay structures and how it does it work across registers of identity, like for staff. So things like that. I picked out a bunch of things out of this document that were clearly tied to performance evaluations and expectations of my job. And I wrote a long letter to HR and I said, what do these things mean? Can you give me an example of what this means? And I also asked, what does equity mean? Because it doesn't, I think we're using different dictionary. Like by then I knew we were using different dictionaries, like racism, different dictionary, equity, different dictionary, at least what I thought of as equity. I never really examined it that much. And I went to meet with the director of the office. This is while my complaint was being investigated, the director of the Office of Equity Inclusion a couple of times. And his response was, well, when I think of equity, I think of this. And he gave me an example. And so I said, so is that he gave me an analogy of being invited to the party versus being able to dance at the party, something like that. And so I said, okay, is that the Smith College official definition of equity? And he's like, well, no. And you should read some stuff. And he sent me, I kid you not, he followed up with an email recommending I read Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. That was the first time I'd heard of that book. And Me and White Supremacy by Layla, that one. And then he referred me to somebody else. I mean, it was just like, there was no straight answers. And HR, I wrote to them, I followed up twice more, no response. They passed me around. So then finally, I was expected to go to some meetings to talk about this document, Toward Racial Justice at Smith. And I had already been told, if you're uncomfortable, it's a power play. Like there was no way I could win at this meeting. I didn't feel comfortable being silent. And I thought, well, I'm going to speak up at this meeting. And I started getting really anxious about it. I had a lawyer by this time. And by this time I'd been thinking about a video. Like that had always been kind of the nuclear option in the back of my mind. And I really didn't want to go there. I really tried not to go there. I sent one final Hail Mary email to members of the president's cabinet, or everybody I'd been passed around to. I put them all in one email. I said, look, you're telling me that racism is an invisible system. I look back at the email, I'm like, wow, I'm pretty proud of that email. It's like, this is morally reprehensible to ask me to do this, to ask me to push this to students. I have filed a complaint stating that I'm in a racially hostile environment, and now the environment has grown more hostile. I ask that you stop doing this. That's basically what the email said. No response. No response. Wow. So I got on YouTube and I made a video. And that was in October. That was the end of October. And a few days later, they suddenly concluded my investigation. And they found that they didn't deny that any of the things had happened. They stated that they had a legitimate reason for doing the things that they had done. And a month later, I was put under investigation. And that was because they stated the investigation was, they stated a bunch of things in that meeting, but really what I was under investigation for was forwarding an email to myself that they contend had private student information in it. What had happened was, after I made the video and I went on Tucker Carlson shortly after that, we got a bunch of emails to the department, and I answered the departmental email. Well, we all do collectively. And there were a bunch of emails saying Jodi Shaw is associating with a white supremacist, Tucker Carlson, and you need to fire her, or you need to reprimand her, or denounce her, just a bunch of emails. Yeah. And they were mostly from alums. In fact, almost all were from alums. And I was forwarding them to myself because I now have obviously I'm collecting any documentation. And they said, you can't do that. That's a compromising privacy. And then they said one of the emails had private student. And I still to this day do not know which email they're referring to. There was one email where somebody mentioned a student's name, but this was an outside party. So it wasn't like there wasn't anything private. So I was under investigation, and then, which is predictable. I kind of expected at some point to be that's a predictable course of events for an institution that I already knew at that point I would probably be placed under investigation. But I consider it retaliation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Obviously. And trying to say that it had nothing to do, it was just ridiculous. And there were other acts of retaliation too that occurred during the summer and in the fall, which I won't get into. And then, there were settlement negotiations, which I won't get into. And then in the end, it was time for me to go back to work because I said no to the settlement negotiations. And I had to decide, like you said, Keri, this is a cult. In my mind, I framed it as an abusive partner. Mm-hmm. And it was agonizing. First of all, the settlement stuff was agonizing. And then it was agonizing to me, like, do I go back into this environment? I thought if I go back, I can like keep fighting from within. But it's also, it something we haven't talked about is the damage, or we touched on it, the massive amount of damage it causes to be in an environment where first you're lying to yourself for a long time, and then you start telling the truth, and it's like it's super hostile, and then people are retaliating, and you're always afraid. I was always afraid I would be like mess up and make a mistake and get fired because they're watching everything I do. And I thought, it was just really, really, really damaging. I'll say that.
It is, like you said, it's like knowing, like, do I go back into this? Do I stay in this relationship with this abusive partner?
Yeah.
And let it play out because this is the smarter thing to do tactically?
Right.
Or do I just end it and cut my losses? And like, that is a hard decision.
It was hard. And, then I at that point, then you're unemployed. You're not getting a paycheck anymore. Yeah. And I'm very public, so I'm rather unhireable at this point by, any other institution, especially in this area. So that was hard. And I didn't know, and I did launch a GoFundMe, but I did not know. I was like stepping off a cliff because I had no idea, would the GoFundMe raise $5? Would it actually raise enough to help me? And I had legal fees, so I was, it was very, it was a nerve-wracking time. I remember lying in my bathtub with the shower running, just crying, like just not knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And, but wow, I got so much support.
But you ultimately resigned, just for people who don't know the end of this.
Yeah, I did resign, right? And I resigned very publicly. I resigned. I sent the letter to the college, to the president. I don't know, like around 4 p.m. I think it was a Friday. Can't remember. And then Barry Weiss published my resignation letter a few hours later. So that kind of, Smith, I don't think was happy about that.
Do you regret resigning? I mean, do you think it was the right thing to do? Do you think you should have stuck it out and seen if they fired you?
Yeah, some people wanted me to do that.
I'm just wondering.
I don't regret it. Like, I was just thinking today, I'm finally starting to, I'm in recovery. It's like, it truly is like getting out of a cult.
Yes.
I'm still deprogramming. I'm still getting my self-esteem back because there's all this introjection that happens, and it still happens to me, where I start to feel, I do slip into that, like I'm a bad person. And I mean, it's gaslighting, right? Like that's what, it's gaslighting. But I am so happy to be out of that environment. I am so glad.
There's no price. I found being out of it, there's no price at which I would go back. So in my case, it was sort of just deciding to firebomb my own career in entertainment, which, I had been successful in my small little niche of the world in working with comedians and producing TV content with comedians. But all of my whole echo chamber, all of my connections, everything was social justice in that world. And so on this side of it, there's no way, even if I went back Like, oh, well, maybe not at the level of success you had, but would you go back to it for this much money or this career or what? No, because that freedom coming out of it is like, it's such a psychological weight off. And like you said, it took a while to divest myself of it anyway. It wasn't like it was just gone immediately. There's still like an internal SJW censor in your head for a while that makes you question things or fearful, or should I say it this way or that way? And you have to stop listening to that voice, that cult programming. But over time, once you get further away from it, it's like, it's just so light. So free and easy to say what I want.
I made a video about that actually right after I resigned. I called it Comfort versus Freedom because in the end, that's what helped me in my decision with the settlement. I was like, okay. And when that crystallized that those were the things I was deciding between, then it was a much easier, like, comfort or freedom. You cannot have both here, Jodi. So what are you going to choose? It was like pretty obvious then. I'm going to have to choose.
In reality, you weren't getting a lot of comfort from your
No, I meant
I was
true.
I wasn't really asking if that, like, I knew you wouldn't regret it that way. I meant tactically, did you regret it? Because forcing them to fire you would have been and maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have dragged it on and just made your life miserable forever, which is the risk, right? But I don't know. Like, do you think you would have had it, like, you have a lawsuit now, would have been better to be fired? That's what I'm curious about.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I considered a constructive dismissal where I was forced to resign. So that's,
okay.
That's, I mean, I could not go back. So in a way that's, but yeah, I mean, I considered that tactically. I thought, but I mean, they could have waited 8 months or a year and then fired me for something unrelated because, the further away you get. But I mean, and that, I don't even think that would have happened because all that whole year, I would have been very vocal probably at work. Yep. It would have been very tense. It would have been more hostile than ever. I mean, they probably would have been walking on eggshells too in terms of retaliation. I don't know. I'm just very glad I'm not there anymore. I definitely made the right decision. So,
So for parents that are watching, what's the full cost of attending Smith College roughly?
Oh my God. $280,000. It's a residential college. So you're also paying for tuition and
room and board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
280,000. I think it's north of that now, a little bit more, like 286.
Well, let's say $300K when you assume that you could be making interest even in a crappy bank account that would get you to $300K if you weren't paying that. So over 4 years.
Yep. $300K.
So,
oh my God.
So why should a parent spend $300,000 to send their 18-year-old to Smith College? Go.
Well, I would say the argument would be, one would be to have the name, right? Smith College on your resume. But I believe that is now that is even tarnished. I know there are some alums now who have said they are embarrassed to have Smith College on their resume. But yeah, I cannot advise parents. I would strongly advise, and again, this is an opinion, my opinion, that parents would strongly consider the ramifications, that this is not the liberal arts education that you perhaps grew up with or believe it to be. This is not a liberal arts institution in the sense of liberal. This is a social justice activist organization. And again, that is an opinion. That is what Smith College has morphed into.
I'm glad you used that word, activist.
Yeah. Activist organization. I view it as buying into, it's a very expensive cult. It's like, you have to spend a lot of money to be in Scientology. You have to spend a lot of money to be in, oh gosh, what was that one I almost got into, Carter? Landmark Forum. I consider
them a cult.
They're culty. They're cult-like. Cult-like, yeah.
Yeah.
They're a little culty.
They're the discount cult.
You have to spend a lot of money to be in Landmark, though. And this, I would say, this is a lot more, potentially a lot more destructive to society and to your child to join this kind of cult, because it's not just
much better than this.
Yeah, Landmark is much better. At least Landmark's about self-improvement. Yeah. This is about instilling racism and sexism and prejudice and into your child and getting them to go out and remake the world based on this worldview.
Yeah, and they're going to feel bad about themselves. It's literally making students. It's not about their identity. It's about there's. It's so upsetting.
Yeah.
It's so upsetting. I would not, during the course of my employment there, I thought to myself, I have 2 children. And I thought, I do not want them to go to college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no way. Yeah. I'm like, there's got to be like a construction, like trade school or something.
Trade school.
Like there's much more productive things they can do, and they can have rich inner worlds. They can read. I mean, because this is not a liberal education any longer. That's not college.
My daughter and I, she's 11, not quite 12. We've had this conversation, and like, if she really wants to go to college, like fine, but it's not a thing that is in, and I never thought, I mean, look, I'm not the kind of guy who would ever thought that I would be saying that to my kid. Like,
please don't go to college.
Like if you had asked me this 10 or 20 years ago, I'd be like, of course. In fact, I want them to get PhDs and whatever. Like, yes, I want them to go to, but now it's like, and if you look back at some of this stuff, the school that I'm thinking of now is, St. John's.
Yeah. The great books.
Yeah. They have this great books. I don't know if they still do it. They probably do. Well, that was my, that's
how
the
could
thing.
You be woke and have they're antithetical.
Yeah, that's why I don't know what they're doing. But I view them as like the classical example of a liberal arts college, right? Mm-hmm. They do it in a particular way that not everyone likes, but that's the kind of stuff that you're supposed to learn in a liberal arts education. And with the exception of St. John's, assuming that they're still doing their great books program, I don't think that's what liberal arts colleges are now. Activism, and even I live in the Bay Area, and even a lot of private schools use the word activism in their mission statements about like building activists and like activism being part of education. And actually, it's really starting to, and I think in a lot of colleges, especially liberal arts colleges, it has usurped the primary purpose of college. It's become an activist factory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really feels that way. And they keep investing more and more money into the mechanisms for doing that, like building up the equity measures and personnel, hiring more people to infuse more social justice. It really does feel like a priority that is taken, and infusing the traditional liberal arts curriculum like with this kind of scholarship. And I can't speak too much to that part at Smith, granted, because I wasn't on the academic side, but I know faculty members who would, adjust their syllabus every semester to try to catch the wave of not getting busted for anything, potentially offensive to students. And that's got to be harmful for the academic side of it.
Yeah. They're doing the same thing at on small town city councils. Like my city council, there's a social justice council member who has groomed and is trying to bring in other social justice council members. This is a smaller town north of Boston. And in a private group that they're in, she's very mouthy. They're not afraid of voicing this stuff where people can read it at all. I'm in the group. They talk about their plans to bring in all these committees, and they have strategy on how to get all these different paid positions in diversity, inclusion, equity. First we have to bring in the facilitator, and the facilitator has to do a training, much like the training you talked about, do a training with all of the existing city council. Then once they do the training about implicit bias, unconscious bias, then they will recommend that we form a special committee and a subcommittee and all, and it just keeps going on. And they do the same thing at school boards. They're doing the same thing in churches and corporations, and it just spreads like a virus. It's, you know, once you get that facilitator in there, then it's committee upon committee. UT Austin here, our diversity, inclusion, equity staff, this is not faculty. This is just administration. It's over 100 people large, and it keeps growing.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money. Yeah.
That's where that tuition goes. That's what that 300K is for.
Yeah. Did you see the new school or the educational platform? It was in the Epic Times. And Michael Rechtenwald. Do you know Michael Rechtenwald?
I know him pretty well at this point. Yeah.
Oh,
he's been on our show a few times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just know him just from
he's
communicating
great
online. Yeah. He's been out there for a while. Like he was a canary, right?
He's interesting because he's educated in this. He was basically a social justice professor for his entire career until very recently. So his knowledge of postmodernism is not something to be reckoned with. They can't really argue with the guy because he really knows what he's talking about. Interesting. But,
well, he's going to be the chief academic officer, apparently. I read that in the Epic Times, and I forget what it's called. Somebody started, it's an alternative education platform, and they're hiring a bunch of professors, and apparently they were overwhelmed with applications. You know, it's grounded in traditional stuff, and they're going to teach American stuff, and it's not accredited. And apparently I just skimmed the article, but they said something about like, why would we get why do we need accreditation? I mean, at this point, at this point, we're truly going off grid because the institutions are all infected, right? And I've heard this from some psychotherapists too, who are letting their licenses lapse because they're like, why there is a demand, because this is affecting the psychotherapy profession. They're now teaching that white people have a different model of psychological development than other people. And it has to do with achieving, this being enlightened as to this anti-racism stuff. Like that's part of like your normal psychological. I mean, this is just crazy. As if this is an objective ingrained truth or something. This is what they're teaching in psychotherapy schools. And it's not unforeseeable that renewing your license is going to entail some kind of pledge or and even the CEU credits, the education you have to do to like keep your license up as it's just getting more and more social justice infused. And so it's like, well, the people who are looking for therapists who aren't woke so they can actually talk about this topic and deprogram and have somebody who's going to be in like, that demand is going to be so high, they are not going to need a license. They can call themselves a coach. Like these people, I've had people contact me like, do you know any anti-woke therapists?
Yes.
That I can work with?
I do know one, by the way. And I also, can I just plug this since this is coming up? I want to post about this and I forgot. This happened yesterday. One of our Unsafe Space community members, she knows who she is. She posted her husband is looking for an app and web developer to build a mental health resource to connect non-woke clientele with non-woke mental health providers. So, and this is a paid position from what I understand. So if you are a web developer, app developer, get in touch with us and I will put you in touch with her. Don't I just plug that in the middle of your interview, Jodi?
No,
sorry, but great. It applies. I mean, I love that this stuff is like, people are getting off grid. People are starting to look for solutions around this, like workarounds for this woke orthodoxy in all of these fields.
Yes. We're going off grid now at this point, and we can do that. And it's happening and it's hopeful. It's really hopeful.
Speaking of which, can you tell us a little bit about, I know a lot of people in our community are familiar with Counterweight. We've referred some people there. For anyone who hasn't heard about it, can you tell us a little bit about Counterweight?
Yeah, Counterweight. So Counterweight is very grounded in liberalism and liberalist values. And so they don't it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. Their aim is not to crush CRT. Their aim is to help people whose lives have been impacted by it and are having trouble with it, whether in their workplace or their children's school or what it is, and don't know what to do. And so it's many pronged. One prong is it's just simply education, like videos about helping people get the language and get a grasp on what is this? What is critical social justice, and what does it mean, and where does it come from? As you know, Helen Pluckrose is one of the founders, and she co-wrote Cynical Theories with James Lindsay, and so she's very knowledgeable about this. So one of the prongs is education, but one of the most beautiful things about and they also do casework. So if you get in touch with them and you have a problem, they will help walk you through it, what to do. They have templates for letters to write to your employer. They have like walkthrough videos. And one of the things I really love about Counterweight is that they meet the individual. They meet you where you're at. And they don't say, here's what we think you should do. They want to know what would you like to accomplish. And, not everybody wants to make a YouTube video and call this stuff out, or is in a position where they're forced to, in my case. But, some people just want to be able to just do their job without like being forced to do X. And so Counterweight will help walk through, okay, how can we achieve that? In some cases, it might be actually joining the Equity and Inclusion Committee and maybe helping steer them, like maybe informing them, this doesn't feel like, maybe being that voice and maybe steering them towards an alternative to this CRT stuff. In some cases, it might be writing a letter. In other cases, it might be connecting the individual with a lawyer to see if they might have a case. And supporting them if they do decide to make a video. So it's wherever the individual is at, because not everybody wants to be public. This is very sensitive stuff, and not everybody is willing to possibly be fired. One of the most beautiful things about Counterweight is their Discord community, because what I tell people, and when people say, what can I do? I always tell people, find at least one other person you can talk to about this, because the process of it's gaslighting, it's crazy making. You are not crazy. You're not alone. You're not racist. Believe me, if you're thinking about this stuff and it's bothering you, it's not because you're racist. Yeah. So like, if you can find one other person, preferably within your organization, to talk to just regularly validate that you are not crazy, that goes so far. That can give you so much strength and courage. And the beautiful thing is that Counterweight recognizes this need for community and validation and deprogramming and the need to talk about this stuff, to talk it out. That's how we figure things out. And because people are confused. But you can get real clear once you start talking to other people. And so they have a Discord server that you can apply to be in it, or just you fill out a form so that they know who you are. And then you can use a different name on the Discord server so that you can still be anonymous, and it's monitored, and then they have channels like by profession. So you can find other people in the arts, or you can find other teachers, or so on and so forth. And that, I think, sometimes that's enough for people. Like sometimes people just go into that server and they talk with other people and they feel, okay, I'm not crazy. Like sometimes just knowing you're not crazy. Okay, I'm not crazy, so I can go along with this stuff. It's fine because I know where I'm at, and they're somewhere else. Or sometimes you're able to troubleshoot with other people on the server in a way that you can solve the problem yourself or make some progress. And you can just, so I really like that about Counterweight. So I think Counterweight's doing some great, great work. It's not like, it's kind of behind the scenes, but they are very busy. Yeah. Very busy. They work very hard. It's a great team, and they're really committed to their values. Which I also like, because I don't think trying to eliminate CRT is going to work, because it's an idea. Yeah. You can't
I feel the same way. So you have to offer alternatives. You have to not just clearly define what it is and help people learn the language, like you said, but give them alternatives and alternative ideas that they feel comfortable talking about. You know who I really want to put in touch with you guys at Counterweight is Jason Littlefield. He works in education here in Texas, and he just did an interview with us where he's still working. They haven't come for him yet, but he thinks it's getting pretty close to where he's going to be in a position like you, where he, what was the word you used? Constructive dismissal.
Yeah.
But he has been developing an alternative framework that I think is really useful for people who want to come armed with something else. It's like, hey, this also addresses diversity and inclusion, but it's not racist. But it's actually liberal, so anyway, I want to put him in touch with you. Yeah, it's actually diverse. It allows for diverse points of view.
Yeah, that's what we want.
One of the things that you did that I think is really important for people to do who are thinking about this stuff is, I remember in one of your videos, you kind of said, okay, well, here's what I mean by inclusion. And you defined it, and you talked about inclusion being an additive process. And then you said, here's what it seems like you guys mean by inclusion. I don't know. It seems like this subtractive process, which it is. I mean, it's Marcuse's repressive tolerance. That's what it is, right? But I think just getting people to start thinking about those three words. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean? What do you mean by them? And then just go verify, will your organization give you clear definitions? Probably they won't, because evasion is one of their main tenets. But if they will, see if those definitions match up with yours. Because I guarantee if you're not racist, their definitions will not match yours.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's really important, is to ask for definitions, because it's also non-confrontational too. Like, it's fair if it's expected part of your job, say, to ask for clarification on terminology. And then I think once you have it, you could go one step farther, and this may or may not be seen as confrontational. It's, okay, well then what would be the markers of being successful in that? Now that you've defined equity, what do I need to look for to know that we've been successful in achieving equity? And then that's probably going to be equally difficult to respond to. And that's something I noticed at Smith a lot. Like, there's no hoped for outcomes other than this vague equity, racial justice. Like, what does that specifically look like? Like, usually in education, you have outcomes, right? You have objectives, hope for outcomes, and then here's how we're going to do it. What are the outcomes, and are we achieving them? That's the next question. Like, where is the evidence or data to support the fact we've been doing this now for X number of months? Where are the data points to show us that it is successfully meeting our stated outcomes? So there's a lot of missing stuff going on there.
That is very similar to a question that I like to ask people in social justice in general. The big picture, they like to redefine racism and say racism is prejudice plus power. Therefore, it's impossible to be racist towards white people because they hold the power in society. And they do the same thing with sexism. And I like to ask them, well, let's take your definition. Let's say that judging and treating white people differently on the basis of their race is just prejudice. It's not racism. It's just prejudice. So we don't have to worry about it that much. So how long, at what measurable end goal will it become racism? And
when is it
when does it become racism, and how do we know that's happened? And then practically speaking, once we've hit that measurable end goal, which they can never define for me, once we've hit that measurable end goal, then how do we start teaching young people? And now that we've taught generations of people it's impossible to be racist towards white people, how do we now flip the script and say, oh, it's racism now? It's racism, guys. Like you've already told them it's not.
Yeah, I know, right? When do we flip? Yeah, it's ridiculous. And also, I'm just thinking about prejudice plus power. So if you take away the power, right, which I guess is the goal, right? I don't know, but then it's just then prejudice is okay.
That's kind of what they're saying, yeah.
Because nobody has power, so it's okay to have prejudice.
Oh, they don't want no one to have power.
Well, yeah.
That is not the goal.
Yeah, this smells like it's about power.
Yes, it does.
Have you noticed yet, Jodi, that when they die, they say rest in power, which tells you a lot about what's at the center. Social justice people, when they die, when a friend they call them friends, but they don't have friends, they're allies. Comrades. When an ally dies, a comrade dies, they are like, rest in power.
Huh, and
that tells you a lot about what's at the center of the ideology, in my opinion. I used to say that. I used to say rest in power.
You did? Wow.
Yes.
You were really in the cult.
You just start conforming. Your language starts conforming and you don't really even think about it. It's like one little thing and then another thing and then another thing. And then you're afraid of saying anything that doesn't align with perfectly, anything that's not ideologically pure that you might get piled on for.
Yeah.
Right. The definition of which is fluid depending on the whim of the mob.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's dangerous territory.
Ideological purity. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who think if I just keep my mouth shut, I'll be okay. But clearly that's a time bomb. That's a ticking time bomb. Because as we have seen over and over again, with the guy flicking the booger out of the van who got fired for this, making the white powers, I believe that's the story. I believe he got fired. I don't know. Maybe that's
wasn't he?
Legend.
He wasn't white too, right?
No, he was Latino, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think there's. It's almost like an obsession with power. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's at the whole heart of this. It's talking about power structures, power. Like who has the power?
I would say it's not almost like an obsession with power. It is an obsession with power. It's exactly what it is. Yeah.
It's not about race. We know that because clearly there are many people of color who can see very clearly that this is all very, very wrong and all just more racism. And those voices are discounted. Those voices, so because it's not really about race.
Yeah. And they have this ambivalent relationship with Asians. You mentioned there's a lot of Asians at Smith College, right? Where sometimes they got to be really mad at Asians and say that Asian silence is violence and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they think they can get the Asians on their side for obtaining power. So sometimes it's about, hey, you're part of the people of color also. So you can tell that it's really just about how will the Asians work towards me getting power? Is it like, am I against them today? Or is there some, I think I can get them on my side for something. And of course they're treated like a massive blob, just like every other
Asians. Group. Yeah. That's like, do you know the number of countries the number of people that fall under the Asian category? I mean, it's probably like there's not even such a thing as Asian culture. You know what I mean? It's just it's not so broad. It's like such a, it's just unreal that we have an affinity group for Asians as if they're going to share some, I don't know, collective personality or share interests just because they're Asian.
Right. Like, try going to Japan and telling people Asian? There. Yeah. Try going to Japan and telling them, oh, you're in the same group as the Koreans and the Chinese and the Thai and Vietnamese. It's like, that won't go over well.
Yeah. It's the same thing as like assuming someone's like when, that person's Chinese just because they look Asian. It's like just very, it's ill-informed, it's ignorance, and it's doing the same thing, really, Asians. Yeah. And also people of color. That I've had people of color tell me that they were a little miffed to discover that suddenly they are now a person of color. This is a label that is being applied to them as if it's really a polite way of saying not white.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's what it means. It just means not white.
Means not white. Which in and of itself is...
It's like a white supremacist kind of, why would you separate out white people and then be like, there's this whole, and if you're not white, you're in this group altogether. Right. Like
white people who show up on time and have individualism and can achieve. And then there's the people of color who, that's all white supremacy.
That's what they teach. It's seriously, it's no different from a Klan meeting. And they're like that thing you described earlier, white people only can come and we're going to sit around and talk about race. only white people, and we're talking about race, and we're going to talk about how our whiteness includes meritocracy and being on time and math. It's like that. Is it a Klan rally? It's so condescending. Can I tell you? I have a friend who, this person's church has just recently adopted wokeness and CRT, and it started seeping into the church, and it's a pretty wealthy white church. And this person is one of only like 6 Black people who go to the church. And this friend is thinking of leaving the church and telling them why, which I thought would be so funny, because these rich white people are like, but we brought this in for you. Like, it's like one of our only Black people's leaving because we brought in critical race theory. Yeah, because it's a load of racist crap. It's like, but it was for you.
We were doing it for you, you poor thing.
Oh,
you're not
like, what a wake-up call. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, James Lindsay calls it that person's not politically Black.
Right.
Right. And then Joe Biden maybe coined that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh yeah. That's right. If you don't vote for me, you ain't Black.
You ain't Black.
Yeah.
Because he uses ain't a lot. That's a normal thing he would say. He wasn't trying to pander to a particular demographic. He says ain't all the time, right?
Sure.
Oh, I didn't know that. I know. I don't
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like...
No. I've never heard him say that ever. No.
Yeah, that's kind of like, trying to talk to the cab driver, like, and use like I don't know, like some kind of like Palestinian accent or something. Like
it's the Hillary Clinton when she puts on that accent. She's done that before.
She does the
she goes down south
or whatever.
Yeah, she does. She's so good. They got hot sauce in her bag. I'm like, I don't. Do you really?
Part of this is like, also part of this is just, let's be frank, it's just fake.
Yeah.
It feels fake. It smells fake. It looks fake. Going to these meetings talking about white privilege, scripted, fake. It's zero.
Performative.
It's totally performative, and I cannot. I just don't like it. It feels like a complete waste of time. I don't appreciate being around people who are like just a caricature of themselves. Like, it just feels like, why are we talking? I don't really feel like we're even talking, because it just feels like you're not really.
Because you're not. There's not another person there. There's a bunch of aphorisms or bromides there that it's a shell that spews syllables they've learned, but you're not talking to a person.
They already, it's programmed. You're just speaking to one of the mouthpieces of this Borg, of this entity. And it's like,
it's horrifying.
They're all going to say the same thing.
It's like Stepfordville or something.
Yes.
And in that kind of environment, you start to feel, I don't know, there's something that happens to your self-esteem, because it's like nobody's seeing anybody else. You're not really seeing, there's no humanity. Like, it's totally dehumanizing. And
right.
Like, you can't really.
Well, I mean, psychological visibility is a thing, right? And there's none of it in those situations, right? There's none.
No, you can't see any. Everybody's reduced to an abstraction, and everybody's afraid to say anything real, and they start getting programs so they're not even. I don't know. They're just dialing it in, I guess. Some people are dialing it in. It's just, oh God, it was such a bad environment there.
That's why I think what you said, it's so important, because there's so much gaslighting that makes you think you're crazy, because everyone's going along with it and conforming. And like you said, that's why it's so important to find someone in your little world, whether it's at your school or organization or church, wherever it is where this is intruding. There's a person who validates that you're not crazy. It's like in Stepford Wives, she had the one friend who agreed, who was like, no, you're not crazy. Like, I see this too. They're robots. It's not just you. But then, of course, her friend was turned, and that was sad.
You guys are making me, you're convincing me that maybe it's actually not a cult. It's like an ersatz cult, because most of the other cult members aren't actually cult members. They're just afraid to admit that they're not cult members. So everyone's pretending to be a member of a cult, and you're all in this collective, let's pretend that we're members of this cult, because like a handful of them are, and it makes the cult look like this big thing, but actually there's not really much there.
It's like the emperor has no clothes kind of thing. Yeah,
Kind of.
Somebody told me it's I don't know where I got this figure. Somebody who knows history better than myself, or about the Cultural Revolution. Like it's 5 to 8% of a population.
Yeah,
they're very vocal.
Well, the Cultural Revolution was mostly college students and some of it was a small percentage of the population that actually was engaged in it, but they affected.
Yeah, that's how powerful.
Right,
yeah, and we have the internet, and I mean. Some days I just feel like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other parallel to the Cultural Revolution, which I think is apt here, is one of the things that Mao did, and he did it intentionally from what I can tell, is so everyone's trying to figure out what Mao Zedong thought is, right? That's their goal. They want to be on the same page as Mao. That was the important thing, to show that you were a member of the group. But Mao didn't want to make clear. He intentionally played his cards really close to his chest. He didn't want it to be clear what Mao Zedong thought was, because that would allow people to show whether they were in the group or not, and people would just signal that they were in the group and it would be over and done with. What he wanted was turmoil, intentionally. So he didn't let you know what Mao Zedong thought was. You had to guess what was right. And he would decide later, kind of whimsically, that's the thing that's that group guessed right. Now you attack them. And sometimes he would change minds. Like people that had just been heroes were suddenly now attacked. So it was one of the things that made it terrifying was there was no clear answer. And when I look at this ideology, because it's decentralized, as we said, but mob controlled often, the rules aren't clear. They might feel clear in the moment, but they can change tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And words can suddenly be racist that were yesterday woke. And it creates that anxiety because you don't actually know. You're constantly proving your loyalty. That's what ends up happening. You have to constantly prove your loyalty because it's a moving target. And it's really just about what Mao wanted was obedience and compliance. And that's what it's about. It's power. A way to demonstrate compliance. It's power. Yep.
So can I tell you, you're making me think of something. I'm jumping on your interview, Jodi, but I think you'll get a kick out of this. This is exactly what you're talking about, how they shift the roles. In the sewist community right now, there's a woman who is woke. She is part of the Borg, and she released a fabric with Captain Marvel on it. I think it was Captain Marvel.
Uh-oh.
But that something. Well, she has him saying, fight. It's him, and it says, "True patriots fight fascism," and it's like a red, white, and blue fabric. And got just first comment, no times a million. Stop and reflect. Delete this and do better. And then
no way.
Yes.
What's the problem?
The problem is she's a white woman and she chose a white character and she used red, white, and blue. And all of this is problematic. And so they're basically saying Black women have done the majority of the work fighting fascism. This design is problematic because here it is, because the fight against fascism has been spearheaded by the Black communities and more specifically by Black women. It devalues the blood, sweat, tears, and lives lost in the Black women in the fight against fascism by placing a white man as the true patriot. It also uses a military man, and the military has not only been used to attack and subdue the Black community. But anyway, my point is, this is a much longer story. I just wanted to use it as an example I just saw. She had to bend the knee. She's already in the cult.
Did she apologize?
She apologized.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to burn it. I'm going to have a ritualistic burning. I'm going to film it. I'm going to bow down.
It's like, I'm so sorry again. Also, anybody who's not Black, no commenting on my post. I only want to hear from Black voices. And, like all the signals. She's like tap dancing. Like my dog, when he wants a treat, he does all the tricks at once. He's like bowing, and then he's like laying down and then rolling over. He's like, da-na, 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 da-na. That's what she's doing. She's doing the tap dance. Anyway,
all I can say is wow, because if she used a Black person on there, whoa. So it's like it makes you not want to do anything. And now we're getting into the realm of creativity, right?
Yeah.
What is this doing to people who are creative? Like, you can't fucking do anything. Oh my God. Yeah, it's oh my God.
Yeah.
This is probably, I mean, I feel like we could go on this forever because Keri's talked about this too now, right? This is one of the reasons that comedy is kind of crap now, because it's so constrained that everyone's afraid to just say something because it might be somehow taken as some proof that you're an evil person.
Which only drives up the demand, I might add.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the forgotten realms of this, if we want to call it a battle for sanity. We can talk about it a lot, but we really do need comedy. We need sports that aren't infected by this, where people root for the same team regardless of what their ideology is. And I think, I don't know, I just think like comedians who can bust out of that, like, oh my God, Tom McDonald, the rapper, doing so well.
I love Tom McDonald.
He's doing so well. Yeah, I mean, like, there's a huge, people are starving for authenticity, and there is none available. So
you nailed it, by the way. Authenticity.
Yeah.
That's it. Something real. Because you said this other stuff is so fake, and young people can smell that. They can smell that fakeness.
It's so fake, and people can't help but respond to authenticity. That's the thing. Like, even if you're super woke, like, and even if you don't want to admit it, like, you can't, it's a human thing. And that's really at the center of art and comedy and all that, like this human condition, that if you can tap into it successfully in a way, if you can make somebody laugh in spite of themselves, like Michael Jackson, you might think he's a pedophile and he's horrible and all this stuff. But when I hear Billie Jean, my body just responds, like I can't, like, it's not even an intellectual process. And so if we can somehow bypass the intellect and come at it from these other areas that people aren't going to put it through their social justice filter or whatever. Yep. I love Tom McDonald. Big plug for Tom McDonald and Nova Rockefeller. I love Nova Rockefeller as well. Like, they are, like you said, there's a hunger for it. People are starving for it. And that's why I think a lot of the independent comic books have done so well. Tom McDonald, independent rappers doing so well. And now we just have to get to that place with comedy and with TV and film. And I know they're off-grid. Tom McDonald's off-grid. I mean, he's still on YouTube, but like, he can't be canceled. As he I think so poignantly states in his
And there is some comedy, right? Like Ryan Long is doing a great job.
Ryan Long, What about Konstantin?
Kissin?
Those two. Is that his name? Yeah.
Oh, Konstantin Kissin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Bill Burr. Doesn't Bill Burr do some?
I don't know if he does.
Bill Burr, I think, is a little iffy. Sometimes he's like, I don't know. I need to watch more of him before I return a verdict. People have told me sometimes he's woke and sometimes he's not woke. And so I don't know myself, though. But
well, honestly, that's like, I'm not a conservative, and I'm not religious either. So I disagree a lot with Steven Crowder, and some of the stuff is, not up my alley. But watching Steven Crowder is enjoyable because everyone there is just being their authentic selves and like doing their thing. And sometimes they say stuff that I don't watch them very often, but like I get a sense of authenticity there. They're saying what they think and meaning it and being funny in ways that are edgy and sometimes probably make people go, I don't know if I like that you did that. But and again, he's not even someone with whom I agree on a lot of stuff, but the authenticity is attractive. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's another problem, isn't it? Like if somebody says one thing that somebody doesn't agree with, then the whole person gets written off. Right. Like that's my issue with Tucker Carlson. Like people are like, how could you associate? I was with you until you went on Tucker Carlson, even though nothing had changed in what I was saying. And it's like, how can you associate with Tucker Carlson? It's like, well, I don't agree with everything he says, but I actually really respect him. He's very thoughtful. Sure. I've seen him in other interviews where he's being interviewed. I'm like, wow, he's actually a really thoughtful guy. He's really well read and articulate, and has he really thinks hard about stuff. And I really respect him for being a champion of the underdog consistently, I think. So I don't know.
He's someone that they just feel like there are certain people that if they get enough of the Borg to agree that a person is white supremacist or whatever, they unperson you, then they feel comfortable saying it as if it's a statement of fact, and they don't feel like they have to even defend it. Calling someone, that is a serious charge, and it actually belittles the severity and the danger of white supremacy as an ideology, to call people that when they're not, and they don't care. They just throw it around, and it's really based on do we feel comfortable doing it? Will enough people nod and agree with this person? Have we done a good enough job? And with Tucker Carlson is one of those people, they feel like, I think they've sufficiently unpersoned him with enough people in the board that they can just say it. Yeah. And you don't need to offer evidence.
Yeah. I think Bill Maher, actually, somebody told me Bill Maher is getting put in that category.
Slowly. They're taking his hall pass away. Yeah.
Yeah. White supremacy. I think any kind of supremacy movement is a little iffy. Black supremacy.
Yeah.
You think?
Asian supremacy. Yeah. I mean, we talk about white supremacy a lot, but let's be real. Supremacy is probably, it's an idea. It's a concept. It's a concept. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to get rid of the concept. And if we're really being honest with ourselves, people can think whatever they want. Mm-hmm. That is at the root of liberalism. And so if people want to have thoughts in their head, then that is their prerogative. That is you literally cannot, I guess you could program people and try to manipulate them, but people are at base free to think what they want. You can try to persuade somebody, but it's really our behavior that matters. It's really what we do. And that's what our entire system is based on, our system of justice. Acting on, you can think about murdering somebody. That's not against the law. But if you murder somebody, that's a whole nother story. Mm-hmm. So even this whole notion of, so-and-so is racist, what does that mean? Did they commit a racist act, or are you saying that they're having, I think some students would look at me and say, she's having racist ideas. And it's well, first of all, I'm not, but even if I was, what does that mean? I'm not committing, racism has gone from something somebody does to something somebody just is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem. Our inner world is now up for grabs, apparently. Our inner world is now up for examination by the society, and the mob will decide if it's up to snuff or not. And I think that and now we have all these technological communications, which can make things pretty dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Plus fakes.
Say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
What?
And they can presume to know what you're thinking as much as they want.
And they assume and presume, and that is the crime. It's thought crimes. That's that's what I'm talking about. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, the crime of having a thought. And especially for an artist, I think it's really the realm of the imagination. Once you start putting limits on that, telling an artist, for example, this sewing person, you can't write that story about that Jewish person because you're not Jewish. Once you start doing that to an artist, you're going to destroy, and they start believing or internalizing it, getting programmed, and then they're not going to be able to wander that.
Yeah, the writing suffers because then you're constrained by your number one priority is to not break any of these taboos, these social justice taboos, and you have this censor in your head. And so that becomes more important than writing an engaging story. And you're just checking off, just like when I was in it, I wasn't engaging in thought. not like actual thought. Yeah, it's a flow. You're just going through the checklist to make sure you're not saying the wrong thing. And the writers are doing the same now. It's like, God, one of the last, I mentioned this recently in another interview, but one of the last most embarrassing things I did before I left the ideology was when I was still working in entertainment. I was helping these 3 comedy writers with a film script. It was a hilarious script. I was helping them. I gave them tips on how to rewrite it to make it more palatable to social justice types. Change the ethnicity of this character, add a trans character, take out this dialogue and replace it with this. And they, to their credit, were like, no. but I was really like, but you're not going to get seen in certain rooms, if you don't do this. And so what? They stuck to authenticity and writing a funny script above like just going in and writing based on social justice committee and tenet of belief.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes just propaganda, right?
Yeah.
We can all see through that.
Well, I mean, one of the goals of the censorship is thought control, right? It's
totally.
It's not that they don't want you to write your article or say your YouTube video, that too, because they don't like you influencing other people, but really they don't want you thinking that way, and they don't want other people thinking that way. And it's about thought control. That's what it's about, which is the most illiberal thing I can imagine.
Yeah, it's really illiberal. It's really dangerous, and it's not progress. It's not moving forward.
Yeah.
We can't move forward if we're not allowed to think freely and talk freely, I would argue.
I think the premise, though, here's I used to think that they were being hypocritical, but I don't think they are, because we're operating on the premise that they think these rules apply universally to everyone. And I think the idea is the cattle shouldn't think, but there should be a group of elites who get to pontificate and break their own rules. And because some of these people are kind of horrible people. They're the kind of people who are mean to wait staff, and like we already talked about, like elites, they're actually racist, and like we've talked about it with the Me Too movement also, where like guys will say, "Well, I apologize, but that's how all guys are," and like us guys have to do better, and it's like, no, dude, that's you. And so like I think that they think that they'll be part of some elite governing structure to society, where they get to have, it's like Caligula gets to do whatever he wants, but no one else should think and needs to go back into your box and do your thing, because they know better how to run society. They're smarter than we are. They're more enlightened, and the concepts that, one of the key tenets of liberalism, like classical liberalism, is universalism, that these ideas should apply universally to everyone, that there's no divine right of kings. And what they want to do is reintroduce the divine right of kings, but they want to be the kings.
Yeah, it's monkey business, isn't it? It's monkeys. We're basically monkeys, really.
They had to power. In the short story Harrison Bergeron, when they adapted it and made a movie out of it. I don't know if you've seen the movie version. No. It's not that great, but they had to flesh out the story a bit to carry a whole film. And so they added a lot that was not in the short story. And one of the things they added is you get to see that elite ruling class who exempt themselves from the rules. The rules don't apply to us.
Department of Equity.
Yes, they're the Department of Inclusion and Equity.
Right.
The rules don't apply to us, but we get to this is how society runs smoothly for all the underlings, is for us to impose these equity rules on, no meritocracy, and nobody can excel at anything. And that's how we avoid war and inequality. But we can break all the rules because we're the manager class.
Do you think it's always been that way? I mean, it's not just applicable to, it's like taking the form of equity, but there's always been like an elite ruling class right?
People who want to rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because even if
there's always been that. Yeah.
Even if it's there wasn't woke around, there's always.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, look, let's
some religions, if it's like we get to be the ones. Carter's the one that told me. I didn't know this history of the Catholic Church in particular, there was a period, I don't know how long that period lasted, Carter, but he was telling me there was a period of time where you weren't allowed to read the Bible, where they were like, we will interpret the Bible for you and tell you what it says. What? What about a personal relationship with God?
Right.
How come I can't read God's word? That's
not allowed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You see that over and over again in history. I think there's always a set of people, and I don't know what it is that causes this psychologically, but there's always a subset of humans who want to rule, and there's a subset that will marry that subset that wants to be ruled.
Want to be ruled,
right? And then there's the rest of us who are kind of like, can you leave me alone? I don't want to rule anyone. I don't want to tell anyone what to do. Also, leave me alone. Like that's not all of humanity. And I don't know why that is, but it's persistent.
It's monkey business. It's chimps.
Yeah.
Well, like even the progressives. Look, I mean, I know the word progressive sounds nice. It means progress. But look, the late 19th century progressives, they weren't into equality and universality at all. They were eugenicists. They were trying to introduce policies to get rid of the undesirable workers, right? Like these people shouldn't breed because they're not good enough. Like none of this is new, I don't think. It's just the aristocracy's changed from sultans and kings to politicians to academia to whatever we're in now, which is this kind of plutocracy sort of. I don't know what exactly it is. It's the whatever category Bezos and
Bill Gates
and politicians and George Soros have, like, whatever that conglomerate is, like it's those elites, and we all kind of know who we're talking about, and people use terms like the cathedral when they talk about what that means, but I mean, look at the Great Reset. They want us. They believe in central control. They believe they should be in control, and you should do your thing within the limits they give you.
Yeah, that's not what our country is based on at all. But
No.
I mean, in reality, it happens right through money. But I feel like I've been thinking about the United States a lot lately. There's this woke stuff, like just the model, the experiment, and the progress, the imperfect progress that has been made, and the number of people who want to come here because they do have a shot at having some power and some money and having a comfortable life.
Yeah.
Do you think that class includes, like, what about the intelligentsia, which is because like journalists and I would say that that includes just academics, them. I think that the reality of that class is there's a whole conglomerate that believes that they are in that class, but if the Marxist revolution happens, most of them will get put up against the wall and shot first, and whoever the big thug is, like, they'll take over, right? Yeah,
but they think they're in it. They think they're protected.
They think they're protected, and they're the ones that this all came from, right? And that's what I try to convince some faculty members who are afraid to speak out, to speak out. I'm like, but don't you understand? Like, you're going to be probably going to be the first one to go if this continues. Like, it's probably not going to be me.
Yeah,
they're going to drive by my house and be like, oh yeah, she's just they're not.
Who cares about her?
She's not a threat. Yeah,
right. She's an underling. She's an underling. Like, that's usually how it goes, right? It's usually they're the first to go. Like, we create these conditions, and then the thug steps in because everybody's malleable, and then gets rid of, like Stalin, banishing all the actual doctors who knew actually how to practice medicine.
Pol Pot did it. Stalin did it. Mao Zedong did it. And Yuri Bezmenov, when he defected to the U.S. or Canada, explicitly said, like, yeah, that's what's happened. That's what happens.
That's what happens. Yeah.
The liberals will be the one that he used the word liberals, I think. And it was, they meant really the kind of intelligentsia, right? That intelligentsia in, again, the Russian Revolution, even they did it, right? So that intelligentsia, because they're leaders and thinkers and agitators, they're very useful to getting the revolution won. But once the revolution is won,
then they're a threat.
They're really hindrance. So you don't want them around at all, right?
Yeah. You made me think. Jodi? Do you know that movie? It's a kind of old movie. So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Yeah, but I don't think I've seen it. I know
Mike
it's like
Myers.
an 80s movie, right?
Yeah, there's a part where he's playing his dad, who's this Scottish conspiracy theorist, and he talks about how everyone knows the world is run by the Pentaverate, which is a secret conglomerate of the Queen, the Vatican, the Rothschilds, the Gettys, and the Colonel Sanders. And it's this 5. And I'm like, as you guys were talking, I was like, oh my gosh, it's the Pentaverate, but it's Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and George Soros and Bill Gates. And Jeffrey the Colonel Epstein. Sanders. And Jeffrey Epstein.
With Jeffrey Epstein providing that as your concierge.
The ghost of Jeffrey Epstein, or is he?
Yeah.
Well, I am so happy that we've had you on. I do want to get close to wrapping up because I have another interview I have to go to. Unfortunately.
It's been a long one. It's good though.
And Jodi, I just saw that you were on Canceled with Rob Rosen and Desma Simon. I love those guys.
Yes. Oh my God. It was such a great, because we talked about the rap thing a lot. Like Desma's like, I don't even listen to rap. She's like, Rob's the hip hop guy. Yeah. It was a good
rating.
Do you know those guys?
I do. They're really cool. We've had them on the show before.
Oh, really?
I'm so happy you got to speak with them.
Oh.
And we will, before we go, we're going to put your bio in the show description and we'll put links to follow you. But can you just tell people, you do currently have a lawsuit pending. Is that correct with Smith?
Yeah, it's in the EEOC. That's the first step.
Okay.
Once it gets through there.
And if people want to support you, where can they do so?
Oh, I just go to my website because everything's there. And there's a couple other workers, the falsely accused workers, they have GoFundMes. You can support them. It's Jodi Shaw, JODISHAW.net. JodiShaw.net.
And
and I think I have links to everything there. I don't think there's a link to the YouTube though. You can just Google that if you want to watch some videos.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm going to be releasing a new video soon. Haven't done one in like 3 months. I've just been trying to.
Are you going to be releasing any rap? No.
I didn't say no.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what you're doing. Do you know, you obviously probably know
recording?
Benjamin. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know Benjamin. I know Benjamin, yeah.
You guys should do something like that together if you have.
Yeah, he's great. He actually I did an interview with him a while ago and he put one of my songs, he did an intermission or whatever and had like one of my songs. Or one of my videos. Like it was like an animated video. It's really cool.
That's cool.
I didn't say I was releasing a rap. I didn't say I wasn't either. The rap, meaning the rap. I didn't say either way.
She didn't say that here, but you can visit JodiShaw.net or find her on YouTube. Thank you, Jodi, so much for coming by.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jodi.
This is really great, Carter and Keri. I really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for your time.
Likewise. You guys are, you know your stuff. I learned a lot.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. The following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please direct any appeals to our internal review board at dev/null. Please note that seppuku, while encouraged, does not guarantee absolution. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Thank you for participating in our longitudinal study of new and exciting messenger RNA gene therapy techniques. Please make a note of any abnormal growths, loss of vision, difficulty breathing, or death. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.